October 1876, Arizona Territory. The sun hung low over the Sonoran Desert, casting long shadows across the cracked earth of the Whitfield Ranch. Tom Whitfield stood at the edge of his property, his weathered hands gripping the wooden fence post so hard his knuckles had turned white. Behind him, his foreman, Dutch Morrison, was practically shouting, "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "You can't be serious, Tom. That wagon is all we got left. Winter's coming in 6 weeks, and without it we can't haul supplies from Tucson. We'll starve before Christmas." Tom didn't turn around. His eyes were fixed on the two figures in the distance, two young Apache women, barely more than girls, standing beside what remained of their broken travois. Even from 100 yards away, he could see they were in trouble. One of them was limping badly, leaning heavily on her sister. Their supplies were scattered across the desert floor, and their horse was nowhere to be seen. "I see them, Dutch," Tom said quietly. "Then you also see their Apache," Dutch shot back. "You'd know what happened to the Henderson family just 3 months ago. Found them in their own barn, Tom, all 5 of them. The whole territory is a powder keg, and you want to walk right into the fire." Tom finally turned to face his foreman. Dutch Morrison had been with him for 8 years, ever since Tom had won this patch of desert in a card game in Tombstone. Dutch was loyal, hard-working, and right now absolutely terrified. "What would you have me do?" Tom asked. "Ride past them? Pretend I didn't see 2 people stranded in the desert?" "Yes," Dutch threw his hat on the ground. "That's exactly what I'd have you do. Tom, I've stood by you through drought, through rustlers, through that flood in '74 that nearly washed us into Mexico. But this is different. You helped those girls, and you're not just risking your life. You're risking mine, Pete's, young Jacob's, everyone on this ranch." Tom looked back toward the 2 sisters. The sun was getting lower. In another hour, the desert would turn cold. In this territory, nighttime temperatures could drop 40 degrees. Without shelter, without supplies, those girls wouldn't last until morning. "Get the wagon ready," Tom said. "Tom, that's not a request." "Dutch, get the wagon ready, load it with whatever supplies they need, and have it ready to move in 10 minutes. Dutch stared at him for a long moment, his face flushed red with frustration and fear. Finally, he picked up his hat, slapped it against his leg to knock off the dust, and walked away muttering curses under his breath. Tom climbed onto his horse, a gray mare named Stella, and rode out toward the 2 Apache sisters. As he got closer, he could see the situation was even worse than he'd thought. The younger one, who couldn't have been more than 16, had a deep gash across her leg. The blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage wrapped around her thigh. The older sister, perhaps 19 or 20, stood protectively in front of her, a knife gripped in her hand. Tom stopped his horse 20 feet away and raised both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you," he called out. "I want to help." The older sister said nothing. Her dark eyes were sharp, calculating, watching his every movement. She didn't lower the knife. Tom slowly dismounted, keeping his hands visible. "My name is Tom Whitfield. I have a ranch just over that ridge. I saw your travois broke down. You need help." Still, the older sister remained silent. Tom noticed her eyes flicking past him, scanning the horizon for signs of other riders, looking for the trap she assumed was coming. "I'm alone," Tom said. "And I'm not armed." He pulled back his vest to show he wasn't carrying a gun. It was a lie. He had a derringer in his boot, but she didn't need to know that. The younger sister said something in Apache, her voice weak and strained. The older one responded sharply, never taking her eyes off Tom. Then the younger sister spoke again, more insistently this time, and Tom saw the moment the older sister's resolve began to crack. "Your sister needs medical attention," Tom said. "That wound is getting infected. I can see it from here. By tomorrow she'll have a fever. By the day after she might not wake up." The older sister's jaw clenched. Tom could see the war happening behind her eyes, the instinct to protect her sister, battling against generations of mistrust, of broken promises, of violence committed by men who looked just like him. "I have a wagon," Tom continued. "It's got supplies, food, water, medicine. It's yours if you want it. No strings attached. You can take it and go wherever you need to go. Why? The older sister spoke for the first time, her English accented but clear. Because it's the right thing to do, Tom said simply. White men don't do the right thing for Apache, she replied, her voice hard with bitterness. Tom couldn't argue with that. He'd seen enough in his 43 years to know she was right more often than she was wrong. The stories of massacres, of poisoned treaties, of promises made and broken, they weren't just stories. They were history, written in blood across this territory. Maybe not, Tom admitted. But I'm not every white man, and you're not every Apache. Right now you're two people who need help, and I'm one person who can give it. That's all this has to be. The younger sister spoke again, and this time Tom heard the desperation in her voice. She was getting weaker. The older sister knelt beside her, and they had a rapid conversation in Apache. Tom stayed where he was, giving them space to decide. Finally, the older sister stood up. She didn't put the knife away, but she nodded once. "I'll be right back," Tom said. He rode back to the ranch at a gallop. Dutch had the wagon ready just as he'd been ordered, but his face was a mask of barely controlled anger. "This is suicide, Tom. You know that, right? You're giving away our last wagon to a couple of Apache girls. Even if they don't kill you themselves, even if their people don't come after us for revenge, we're still ruined. How are we supposed to survive the winter without that wagon?" "We'll figure it out," Tom said, climbing up onto the wagon seat. "Figure it out." Dutch laughed bitterly. "Tom, I followed you through some damn fool decisions, but this one takes the cake. You're throwing away everything we've built for two strangers who'd just as soon cut your throat as look at you." Tom picked up the reins. Maybe I'm doing the only thing that matters, treating people like people. I'll be back before dark." He drove the wagon out to where the sisters waited. The older one helped her sister stand, and together they approached the wagon cautiously. Tom jumped down and pulled back the canvas cover, showing them the supplies inside. Dried beef, flour, coffee, beans, blankets, a water barrel, medical supplies, and even a rifle with a box of ammunition. The older sister's eyes widened slightly when she saw the contents. "This is too much," she said. "It's what you need," Tom replied. "Your sister needs that leg cleaned and bandaged properly. There's antiseptic in that brown bottle, clean bandages in the wooden box. The food should last you a few weeks if you're careful. The rifle is for protection. We can't pay you. I'm not asking you to." Tom helped the younger sister into the back of the wagon where she could lie down. "Where are you headed?" The older sister hesitated, then said, "North, to the White Mountains. Our people have a camp there," Tom nodded. "That's a 3-day journey, maybe 4 with your sister hurt. Follow the North Star at night, and during the day, keep the sun on your left shoulder in the morning, your right in the afternoon. There's a creek about 20 miles north of here. You'll need to refill your water there." The older sister studied him for a long moment. "What is your name again?" "Tom Whitfield." "I am Kaya," she said. "This is my sister Mala. Why are you doing this, Tom Whitfield?" Tom thought about the question. He could give her a simple answer, something about Christian charity or human decency. But standing there in the fading light, looking into the eyes of this young woman who had every reason to distrust him, he felt he owed her the truth. 10 years ago, "I was broke and starving in Tucson," he said. "I'd lost everything in a bad business deal, and I was 2 days away from dying in an alley. A Mexican woman named Rosa Delgado found me. She didn't know me, had no reason to help me, but she took me to her home, fed me, nursed me back to health. When I asked her why, she said, because when you have the power to help someone and you choose not to, you lose a piece of your soul." I never forgot that. Rosa died the next year, cholera. I never got the chance to pay her back. So now I pay it forward whenever I can. Kaya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Rosa Delgado was a wise woman." "She was," Tom agreed. "Now you should go. You've got a few hours of daylight left. Use them." Kaya climbed up onto the wagon seat. She looked down at Tom, and for the first time her expression softened slightly. "If you ever need help, Tom Whitfield, ask for Kaya, daughter of Chief Nantan." "I will remember this. Safe travels," Tom said. He watched as Kaya drove the wagon north, her sister lying in the back. As they disappeared over the ridge, Tom felt a strange mixture of peace and dread. He'd done the right thing, he was certain of that. But Dutch's words echoed in his mind. What would happen now? Would the Apache see his gesture as kindness or as weakness? Would Kaya's father understand, or would he see it as an insult, a white man's patronizing charity? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tom pushed those thoughts aside and rode back to the ranch. Dutch was waiting for him at the gate, along with Pete Garrison and young Jacob Reynolds, the other two hands who worked the property. "It's done." Dutch asked. "It's done. Then we better start rationing what we got left," Pete said quietly. He was a man of few words, but Tom could hear the worry in his voice. "Winter's going to be hard. We've survived hard winters before," Tom said. Though even he wasn't sure he believed it this time. That night, Tom lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling of his small ranch house. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. He thought about Kaya and Mala, wondered if they'd made it to shelter, if Mala's leg was getting better or worse. He thought about the wagon, loaded with the last of their winter supplies, rolling north toward the White Mountains. Had he made the right choice? In his heart, he knew he had. But hearts didn't fill empty bellies when the snow came. Hearts didn't keep the ranch running when there was no way to haul supplies from town. Tom closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, his mind kept circling back to one question: what would dawn bring? He didn't have to wait long to find out. Tom woke to the sound of roosters crowing, but it wasn't morning yet. His eyes snapped open in the darkness, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle beside his bed. Something was wrong. Those roosters shouldn't be crowing for another 2 hours. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The air was cold enough to see his breath, and the stars were still brilliant overhead. Everything seemed normal, too normal. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Dutch emerged from the bunkhouse, his suspenders hanging loose over his shoulders, a shotgun in his hands. "You feel it too?" Dutch whispered. Tom nodded. "Wake Pete and Jacob, quietly. Something's out there." As Dutch disappeared back into the bunkhouse, Tom walked toward the eastern fence line, his eyes scanning the dark ridge that separated his property from the open desert beyond. The moon was just a sliver, providing barely enough light to see by, but Tom had lived on this land long enough to know its contours like the back of his hand. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement along the ridgeline. One shadow, then another, then dozens more. His blood ran cold. Pete and Jacob joined him at the fence, both carrying rifles. Dutch took up position on Tom's left, his shotgun loaded and ready. "How many?" Pete asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Can't tell yet," Tom said, "but it's a lot." As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the shapes on the ridge became clearer. Warriors. Apache warriors. At least 200 of them, maybe more. They sat on their horses in perfect silence, a wall of humanity stretching across the entire eastern ridge. "Sweet Jesus," Jacob breathed. The young man was only 19, and his hands were shaking so badly Tom could hear his rifle rattling. "Steady," Tom said quietly. "Nobody fires unless I give the word." "Understood?" "Tom, there's 200 of them and 4 of us," Dutch said. "If they want us dead, we're already dead. Firing isn't going to change that." "Then we don't give them a reason to want us dead," Tom replied. As the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, one warrior rode forward from the group. He was older than the others, his long hair streaked with gray, his face marked with the deep lines of a man who had seen too many battles. He wore a beaded vest and carried a lance decorated with feathers and what looked like scalps. Tom's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to stand tall. He handed his rifle to Dutch. "What are you doing?" Dutch hissed. "Going to talk to him," Tom said. "That's suicide." "Maybe, but if I don't, it's suicide for all of us." Tom stepped over the fence and began walking toward the approaching warrior. Behind him he heard Pete mutter a prayer. The distance between Tom and the warrior closed with agonizing slowness. Tom's boots crunched on the dry earth, the sound impossibly loud in the morning stillness. When they were 20 feet apart, both men stopped. The warrior's dark eyes studied Tom with an intensity that made him feel like he was being weighed and measured. This was a man who had killed before, many times, and would not hesitate to do so again if the situation called for it. "I am Nantan," the warrior said, his voice deep and carrying easily across the distance. "Chief of the Chiricahua Apache. You are the one called Tom Whitfield. It wasn't a question." Tom nodded. "I am. You gave your wagon to my daughters." Kaya and Mala. Tom's mouth went dry. This was Kaya's father, the father of the 2 sisters he'd helped. "And he'd brought an army." "I did," Tom said, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. "They needed help. I had a wagon they could use." "Why?" It was the same question Kaya had asked. Tom gave the same answer. "Because it was the right thing to do." Nantan's expression didn't change. "The right thing. You know what the right thing is." He gestured broadly at the land around them. "My people have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We were here before your grandfathers' grandfathers were born. Then white men came and said this land was theirs. They said signing papers made it so. They said it was the right thing." Tom said nothing. What could he say? Nantan was right. They took our land, Tom Whitfield. They killed our children. They broke every promise they ever made. And they said it was the right thing. Nantan's voice remained calm, but Tom could hear the anger beneath it, an anger that had been building for generations. "So when you tell me you did the right thing, I wonder, the right thing for who?" "For 2 people who needed help," Tom said quietly. "That's all I saw. Not Apache, not white. Just 2 people in trouble." Nantan studied him for a long moment. "My daughter Mala's leg was badly infected. Without medicine, without shelter, she would have died. Kaya told me this." Tom's heart was beating so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He had no idea where this conversation was going, whether Nantan had come to thank him or to kill him. "Kaya also told me you gave them everything," Nantan continued. "Food, water, medicine, blankets, even a rifle. She said this was your last wagon, that without it you and your men would suffer this winter." "We'll manage," Tom said, though he wasn't sure that was true. "Will you?" Nantan gestured toward the ranch house. "I see your land. The grass is thin, your water low. You have few cattle, and winter comes soon. Without that wagon to bring supplies from town, what will you do when the snow falls?" Tom didn't have an answer. He'd been asking himself the same question all night. Nantan turned his horse slightly, looking back at the warriors assembled on the ridge. "I came here at dawn with 200 warriors, Tom Whitfield. Do you know why?" "No," Tom admitted, "because I needed to see if you were real." Nantan looked back at him. "In my 53 years, I have known many white men. Some were honest, some were liars, some were cruel, some were indifferent. But I have never known one who would give everything he had to help my people, expecting nothing in return. I needed to see with my own eyes if such a man existed, or if my daughters were fooled by pretty words." Tom felt sweat running down his back despite the cold morning air. "And what do you see?" Nantan dismounted from his horse. He walked toward Tom, and every instinct screamed at Tom to step back, to run, to do something. But he held his ground. When Nantan was directly in front of him, the chief reached out and placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. "I see a man who kept his word," Nantan said. "I see a man who valued life more than property. I see a man who perhaps understands that we are all human, regardless of the color of our skin or the language we speak." Tom didn't dare to hope yet. "Chief Nantan, Nantan held up a hand, silencing him. "You gave my daughters everything you had. This is a debt that must be repaid. In my culture, such generosity cannot go unanswered." He turned and signaled to the warriors on the ridge. Tom watched as the warriors began to move, but they weren't attacking. Instead, they were leading horses, dozens of them, maybe 50 or more, down from the ridge toward the ranch. Behind the horses came wagons, 3 of them loaded with supplies. Tom's eyes widened. "Chief Nantan, I don't understand." "You gave when you had little," Nantan said. "So we give when we have more. These horses are strong, good for ranch work. The wagons are yours. The supplies will see you through the winter, dried meat, corn, beans, blankets. We take care of our own, Tom Whitfield. And by helping my daughters, you became one of our own." Tom felt his throat tighten. He couldn't speak. "But this is not just payment of a debt," Nantan continued. "This is a promise. You showed my people mercy when you could have shown them none. You treated them as human beings when others would have left them to die or worse. For this, you have my protection. Any Apache who raises a hand against you or your ranch will answer to me. You have my word, and my word is iron." Tom finally found his voice. "I don't know what to say." "Say you will remember this," Nantan replied. "Say you will remember that Apache keep their promises, even when others do not. Say you will tell others what happened here, so they know we are not the savages they believe us to be." "I will," Tom promised. "I swear it," Nantan nodded, then called out in Apache. Several warriors rode forward, leading the horses and wagons onto Tom's land. Dutch, Pete, and Jacob stood frozen at the fence, their mouths hanging open in shock. One of the warriors approached Tom, carrying something wrapped in deerskin. He handed it to Tom with a solemn nod. Tom unwrapped it carefully and found a beautifully crafted hunting knife, its handle inlaid with turquoise and silver. "That belonged to my father," Nantan said, "and his father before him. It is a gift from one man of honor to another. Keep it, and remember that honor exists in all people if we have the courage to see it." Tom accepted the knife with both hands, bowing his head in respect. "I will treasure it, Chief Nantan." "Thank you." Nantan mounted his horse again. "My daughters wish to thank you as well. They are with the women, preparing food for your men. They will bring it before we leave." As if on cue, Kaya and Mala appeared from behind one of the wagons. Mala was still limping, but the bandage on her leg was clean and white, and her color had improved dramatically. She was going to be fine. Kaya walked up to Tom, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. "My father told me you looked scared when you saw the warriors this morning." Tom laughed, feeling the tension drain from his body. "Terrified would be more accurate." "Good," Kaya said. "You should have been. 200 warriors is very scary." Her smile widened. "But you were brave enough to walk out anyway. That takes courage." Mala stepped forward, leaning on her sister for support. She spoke in Apache and Kaya translated. "She says you saved her life. She says she will never forget the white rancher who saw her as a person, not as an enemy. She says you restored her faith that good people still exist in this world." Tom felt his eyes burning. "Tell her I'm just glad she's going to be okay," Kaya translated, and Mala nodded, tears running down her cheeks. She reached out and squeezed Tom's hand, then said something else. "She says if you ever have a daughter," Kaya translated, "she hopes that daughter is as fortunate as she was, to have a father who taught her what real honor looks like." Tom couldn't hold back his own tears anymore. "Thank you," he whispered. "Both of you." The sisters embraced him, and for a moment all the violence and hatred that had defined relations between their peoples seemed to fall away. In that moment, there was only gratitude, respect, and the recognition of shared humanity. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Nantan gave the signal to depart. The warriors began moving back toward the ridge, taking their leave as silently as they had arrived. But before Nantan left, he rode close to Tom one last time. "The world is changing, Tom Whitfield," he said. "My people's time on this land grows short. I can see it coming like a storm on the horizon. Soon there will be no more free Apache, no more warriors riding across these deserts. We will be confined to reservations. Our children will forget the old ways, and our language will fade like morning mist." His eyes grew distant. "But what happened here today, this will not be forgotten. My grandchildren will know the story of Tom Whitfield, the white rancher, who chose kindness over fear. And perhaps when they tell that story, they will remember that not all white men were our enemies. That some, a few, understood we were all simply trying to survive in this hard land. I'll make sure people know the same about the Apache," Tom promised. "That your people of honor who value loyalty and repay kindness with kindness." Nantan smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "Then we both have work to do, my friend. Goodbye, Tom Whitfield. May your winters be mild and your water never run dry. Safe travels, Chief Nantan." And thank you." Tom watched as the last of the warriors disappeared over the ridge, the dust from their horses settling slowly in the morning air. Behind him he heard Dutch, Pete and Jacob approaching. Did that really just happen? Jacob asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I think it did," Pete said. Dutch walked past them to examine the horses and wagons. He ran his hand along one wagon's side, then looked at the supplies loaded inside. When he turned back to Tom, his eyes were wet. "You were right," Dutch said simply. "I'm sorry I doubted you." Tom put his hand on his foreman's shoulder. "You were trying to protect us." "There's no shame in that." They spent the rest of the morning securing the horses and unloading the supplies. There was enough food to last them well into spring, enough blankets to keep them warm through the coldest nights. And the horses would make the ranch work infinitely easier. As Tom worked, he kept thinking about what Nantan had said, that the Apache's time was running out. He thought about the inevitable march of civilization, the railroads and settlements that would soon cover this desert, and he felt a deep sadness for what would be lost. But he also felt hope. Because if one act of kindness could bridge a divide that seemed unbridgeable, if one moment of seeing another person's humanity could lead to friendship instead of violence, then maybe there was a chance for a better future. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't require one people to destroy another. That night, as Tom lay in his bed, he held the knife Nantan had given him. The turquoise caught the lamplight, gleaming blue-green in the darkness. He thought about the chief's father, and his father before him, and all the generations of Apache who had lived and died on this land, and he made himself a promise. He would never forget what happened at dawn. He would tell this story to anyone who would listen, for as long as he lived, because some stories were too important to let die. Outside, the wind whispered across the desert, carrying with it the sound of distant drums and the memory of 200 warriors who had come not for war, but for honor. 3 weeks passed after that remarkable dawn, and Tom Whitfield found himself living in a world that had fundamentally changed. The horses Nantan had gifted were strong and tireless, making the ranch work that used to take 4 men only require 2. The supplies filled the storeroom to capacity, and for the first time in years, Tom didn't worry about rationing every bean and strip of dried meat, but the real change wasn't in the livestock or the supplies. It was in how people looked at him when he rode into Prescott, the nearest town, 40 miles south of his ranch. The first time Tom went for supplies after the Apache visit, he noticed it immediately. Conversations stopped when he walked into Miller's general store. Eyes followed him down the aisles. When he approached the counter, Edgar Miller, who'd been friendly enough before, served him with barely concealed hostility. "Heard you had some visitors," Edgar said, his voice flat as he tallied Tom's purchases. "News travels fast," Tom replied evenly. 200 Apache warriors on your property, and you're still breathing. Makes a man wonder." Edgar leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. "Makes a man wonder whose side you're really on." Tom felt anger flare in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm on the side of doing what's right, same as I've always been, right?" Edgar snorted. "Tom, the Apache killed my cousin last year, burned his homestead to the ground while his wife and kids watched. Then they killed them too. So you'll forgive me if I don't see much right in befriending them." Tom wanted to argue, wanted to explain that what happened to Edgar's cousin was a tragedy born from decades of broken treaties and violence on both sides. But he could see it would be useless. Edgar's pain was too raw, his anger too justified in his own mind. "I'm sorry about your cousin," Tom said instead. "Truly? But what I did doesn't change what happened to him, and it doesn't mean I'm anyone's enemy." Edgar slid the wrap supplies across the counter. "That'll be $8, Tom paid and left, feeling the stares burning into his back. As he loaded his wagon outside, a group of men approached, ranchers and townspeople he'd known for years. Their leader was Cyrus Blackwood, a cattle baron who owned half the grazing land in the territory. "Whitfield," Cyrus said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About you making peace with the Apache while the rest of us are trying to survive them." Cyrus was a big man, well over 6 feet, with hands like ham hocks and a face weathered by decades of desert sun. "You know how many head of cattle I lost to Apache raids last month?" 43. "That's over $2,000 worth of beef just gone. I'm sorry for your loss, Cyrus, but nothing," Cyrus interrupted. "You're setting a dangerous precedent. You're showing weakness, and in this territory, weakness gets people killed. The army's been trying to move these savages onto reservations for years, and men like you are making their job harder." Tom's hands clenched around the wagon reins. "I helped 2 people who needed it. That's not weakness. That's humanity. Call it what you want," another man chimed in, Frank Dalton, who ran a trading post. "But you made friends with the Apache, and now you got special protection. Meanwhile, the rest of us are still targets. How's that fair?" "I never asked for protection," Tom said. "Chief Nantan offered it because I helped his daughters. Would you have rather I left them to die?" "Yes!" Cyrus roared. "Damn right I would have. Every Apache that dies is one less threat to my family, my livelihood, my future." "You should have left them, Tom. You should have let nature take its course." Tom stared at Cyrus, feeling sick to his stomach. "Is that really who we are? Is that what we've become?" "It's what we have to be to survive," Cyrus said, his voice dropping to something almost sad. "I didn't make this world, Tom. I'm just trying to live in it." Tom climbed onto his wagon seat. "Well, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on that." As he drove away, he heard Cyrus call after him, "You're making enemies, Whitfield. Don't come crying to us when your Apache friends turn on you." The ride back to the ranch was long and lonely. Tom had always known his decision would be controversial, but he hadn't fully anticipated the depth of hostility it would generate. These were people he'd known for years, people he'd considered friends. Now they looked at him like a traitor. When he got back to the ranch, Dutch was waiting at the gate. "How'd it go in town?" Dutch asked, already reading the answer on Tom's face. "About as well as a rattlesnake in a hen house," Tom replied. "They think I'm working with the Apache against them," Dutch sighed. "Can't say I'm surprised. People are scared, Tom, and scared people don't think straight. Doesn't make them right. Never said it did. But it does make them dangerous." Dutch helped Tom unload the supplies. "We might need to be careful for a while. Keep our heads down, watch our backs." But keeping their heads down became impossible 2 days later when trouble arrived, in the form of Lieutenant Marcus Brennan and a detachment of 30 cavalry soldiers. Tom was working on repairing a fence when he saw the blue uniforms approaching. His stomach sank. The Army's presence in the territory had been increasing lately, part of a renewed effort to force the remaining free Apache onto reservations. Lieutenant Brennan's arrival couldn't be a coincidence. The officer was young, maybe 30, with the rigid bearing of a West Point graduate and the cold eyes of someone who'd seen combat. He dismounted and approached Tom with military precision. "Thomas Whitfield?" Brennan asked. "That's me. I'm Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, United States Army. I need to ask you some questions about your recent contact with hostile Apache forces." Tom set down his tools. "They weren't hostile. They were grateful. I'll be the judge of that." Brennan pulled out a small notebook. 3 weeks ago, approximately 200 Apache warriors, led by the renegade Chief Nantan, entered your property. Is that correct? "Chief Nantan isn't a renegade," Tom said carefully. "He's a leader of his people. Chief Nantan," Brennan said, his voice dripping with disdain, "has refused to relocate to the San Carlos reservation. That makes him by definition a renegade. Now answer the question. Did he come here with 200 warriors?" "He did." "And what was the nature of this visit?" Tom explained the story. Helping Kaya and Mala, Nantan's arrival, the gifts exchanged. Brennan listened without expression, scribbling notes occasionally. When Tom finished, Brennan closed his notebook. "Mr. Whitfield, do you have any idea how serious this is? You've established friendly relations with a hostile Apache band. You've accepted gifts from them. In some circles, that could be considered collaboration with the enemy." "Enemy!" Tom felt his temper rising. "The enemy saved my ranch. The enemy showed more honor and generosity than most of the so-called civilized people in this territory. That enemy Brennan shot back. It has been raiding settlements, stealing cattle, and killing civilians for years. Just last month, Nantan's warriors attacked a wagon train near Fort Verde. 4 people died, including a 12-year-old boy. Tom felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. I didn't know about that. Of course you didn't, because Nantan showed you his honorable side, and you believed that's all there was. But war isn't honorable, Mr. Whitfield. It's brutal and complicated, and the Apache are fighting for their survival by any means necessary. That includes killing innocent people. Tom wanted to defend Nantan, wanted to say the chief he'd met wouldn't do such a thing. But he knew that was naive. This was war, and in war everyone's hands got bloody. What do you want from me, Lieutenant? Tom asked quietly. Information. You've established a relationship with Nantan. That makes you valuable. Brennan's eyes glinted with calculation. The army needs to know where Nantan's camp is located. We need to know his numbers, his weapons, his plans. You could help us end this conflict peacefully by encouraging Nantan to surrender and move to the reservation. You want me to spy on them, to betray their trust. I want you to help prevent more bloodshed, Brennan corrected. On both sides. If we can locate Nantan's camp, we can negotiate a peaceful surrender. No one else has to die? Tom laughed bitterly. You really think that's how it'll go? You'll find their camp and politely ask them to leave? Lieutenant, I may not know much about military tactics, but I know enough to recognize a lie when I hear one. Brennan's face hardened. What happens next is not up to me. I follow orders, but I can promise you this. With or without your help, we will find Nantan. And when we do, it will be better for everyone if we can negotiate rather than fight. I won't help you, Tom said firmly. Nantan showed me trust and honor. I won't repay that with betrayal. Then you're a fool, Brennan said, and you're choosing the wrong side of history. The Apache's time is over, Mr. Whitfield. The sooner they accept that, the less suffering there will be. Maybe their time is over, Tom acknowledged. But that doesn't mean I have to help speed it along by stabbing them in the back. Brennan stared at him for a long moment, then remounted his horse. You're making a mistake. When this territory is finally civilized, people will remember who stood with progress and who stood with savagery. I suggest you reconsider where your loyalties lie. As the cavalry rode away, Dutch approached from the barn. That looked tense, Dutch said. They want me to inform on Nantan. Tell them where his camp is located. Dutch whistled low. And what did you tell them? I told them to go to hell, Tom said. Not in those exact words, but the message was clear enough. Tom, you're putting yourself in a dangerous position. The army on one side, the ranchers on the other, and the Apache in the middle. That's a lot of enemies for one man. I know. Tom looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set. But what else can I do, Dutch? I gave Nantan my word. A man's word is all he's got. Once you start breaking it, even for good reasons, it stops meaning anything. Dutch nodded slowly. I suppose you're right. Still doesn't make this situation any less dangerous. That night, as Tom sat alone in his house, he thought about the impossible position he'd found himself in. On one side were the settlers, people like Cyrus and Edgar, who'd suffered real losses at Apache hands and wanted revenge, or at least security. On the other side were the Apache, fighting desperately to preserve their way of life in the face of inevitable extinction. And in the middle was him, trying to hold on to the simple belief that people should help each other, regardless of which side they were on. The knock on his door came near midnight. Tom grabbed his rifle before answering. When he opened the door, he found Kaya standing in the darkness, her horse tied to the porch rail. Kaya, what are you doing here? I came to warn you, she said, stepping inside quickly. The cavalry was at your ranch today, asking questions about my father. How did you know? We have scouts watching. We always know when the bluecoats move. Kaya's face was grave. Tom, my father wants you to know that you owe us nothing. He understands the position you're in. If you need to tell the soldiers where we are to protect yourself, he will not hold it against you. Tom shook his head firmly. I would never do that. I told him you would say that, Kaya said with a sad smile. but he wanted me to give you the choice anyway. He says no friendship is worth dying for. Your father is wrong about that, Tom said. Some friendships are worth everything. Kaya's eyes glistened with tears. You are a rare man, Tom Whitfield. In another time, another place, maybe our peoples could have been friends instead of enemies. Maybe we still can be, Tom said, though he knew it was probably false hope. No, Kaya said softly. My father is right. Our time is ending. Soon the soldiers will find us, or we will starve, or we will surrender. But before that happens, I wanted you to know that you changed something. You showed me that hatred isn't inevitable, that people can choose to see each other's humanity even when everything tells them not to. That matters, Tom. It matters more than you know. She turned to leave, but Tom stopped her. Kaya, if things get bad, if you or your family need help, you come here. You understand? No matter what, you come here, and I'll do whatever I can. Kaya nodded, unable to speak. Then she slipped back into the night, leaving Tom alone with his thoughts and the weight of impossible choices. As he lay in bed that night, Tom realized that the simple act of helping two people had drawn him into something far larger than himself. A conflict between civilizations, a clash of worlds that had been building for centuries, and he was just one man caught in the middle, trying to do right by everyone, and knowing that was impossible. But he also knew this: when everything fell apart, as it inevitably would, he would still be able to look at himself in the mirror. He would still be able to say he kept his word, that he chose honor over expedience, humanity over hatred. In the end, maybe that was all anyone could do. Outside, the wind howled across the desert, carrying with it the promise of winter and the whisper of coming storms, both the kind that brought snow and the kind that brought blood. Winter came hard to the Arizona Territory that year. By December, snow blanketed the higher elevations, and even the desert valleys turned bitter cold at night. Tom's ranch, fortified by Nantan's gifts, weathered the season better than most. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the frost that had settled between Tom and his neighbors. It started with small things. Orders at Miller's General Store took twice as long to fill. When Tom's fence needed repair, the lumber he'd ordered from Prescott arrived warped and unusable. An accident, they said. At church on Sundays, families who'd once greeted him warmly now looked away or moved to different pews. Pete noticed it first. Boss, you seen this? He held up a newspaper from Tucson, dated 2 weeks prior. The headline read, Local Ranchers Apache Alliance Raises Questions. Tom took the paper and read. The article painted him as either a fool or a collaborator, possibly both. It questioned his loyalty, suggested he might be providing information to hostile forces, and implied that his friendship with Nantan endangered every settler in the territory. It's all lies, Pete said angrily. They're making you sound like a traitor. Let them write what they want, Tom replied, though the words stung more than he cared to admit. The truth is the truth, regardless of what newspapers print. But the newspaper article had consequences. 2 days later, Marshal Wade Harrison rode out from Prescott with official business. Harrison was a fair man, in his mid-50s, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much violence. He'd been marshal for nearly 20 years and had a reputation for honesty, which made his visit all the more concerning. Tom, Harrison said as he dismounted, his tone apologetic. I need to ask you some official questions. They sat on the porch, and Harrison pulled out a document. There's been complaints filed against you. Several ranchers, including Cyrus Blackwood, claim you're in league with hostile Apache forces. They say you're receiving stolen goods and possibly providing intelligence about settler movements. Tom's jaw clenched. That's ridiculous, Wade. You know me better than that. I do, Harrison agreed. But I've got a job to do. Did Chief Nantan give you horses and supplies? He did, as payment for helping his daughters. There was nothing stolen about it. Those were his horses, his supplies. It was a gift between friends, Harrison made notes. And have you had any contact with Nantan or his people since that initial meeting? Tom hesitated. If he mentioned Kaya's midnight visit, it would only confirm the worst suspicions. But lying to Wade felt wrong. Kaya came to warn me that the cavalry was asking questions, Tom admitted. She wanted to make sure I knew I wasn't obligated to keep their secrets if it put me in danger. That was 6 weeks ago. About that, yes, Harrison nodded, writing. Tom, I'm going to be straight with you. There's talk of charging you with providing aid to enemy combatants. It won't stick. You haven't actually done anything illegal, but the investigation alone could ruin you. Banks won't extend credit to someone under federal investigation. Suppliers won't do business with you. You could lose everything, so what do I do? Publicly distance yourself from Nantan, Harrison said bluntly. Make a statement saying you regret the association, that you were naive about Apache intentions. Give people something to make them feel like you're on their side again. Tom stood up and walked to the porch rail, looking out at his land. Everything he'd built was here, 10 years of backbreaking work, sacrifice, and dreams. One statement could save it all. I can't do that, Wade, he said quietly. I won't lie about what happened. Nantan kept his word. He showed me honor and generosity. I won't repay that by calling him my enemy just to make other people comfortable. Harrison sighed heavily. I figured you'd say that. Tom, you're one of the most stubborn men I've ever met. It's going to cost you. Then it costs me. The marshal stood to leave. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing helping those girls. But sometimes doing right doesn't protect you from the consequences. Watch your back, Tom. After Harrison left, Dutch approached from the barn. How bad? Bad enough. They can't charge me with anything, but they can make life difficult. It's already difficult, Dutch pointed out. Gets worse. We might have to shut down the ranch entirely. Tom knew Dutch was right, but admitting it felt like surrender. We'll figure something out. But figuring something out became increasingly difficult. In January, the bank in Prescott refused to extend Tom's line of credit, citing character concerns. When a winter storm damaged part of the roof on the barn, no carpenter in town would take the job. Tom, Dutch, Pete, and Jacob had to repair it themselves in freezing temperatures, working late into the night. Then came February, and with it, disaster. Tom woke to the sound of shouting. He grabbed his rifle and rushed outside to find the western pasture engulfed in flames. The grass was dry despite the winter snow, and the fire was spreading fast, driven by strong winds. Get the horses out, Tom yelled. Move the cattle to the eastern fields. For 3 hours, they fought the blaze with everything they had, buckets of water from the well, blankets to beat down flames, desperate attempts to create fire breaks. By the time they finally got it under control, 20 acres had burned, and 3 horses had died from smoke inhalation. Pete found the evidence at dawn, an oil-soaked rag near where the fire had started, and boot prints that didn't match anyone on the ranch. It was arson, Pete said, his face grim. Someone did this deliberately. Tom stared at the blackened landscape, his hands balled into fists. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. Someone had tried to destroy his ranch, possibly kill them all. Could have been anyone, Dutch said. Lot of people have reason to hate us right now. But Tom had a sinking feeling. He knew exactly who was responsible. Cyrus Blackwood had the resources, the motive, and the ruthlessness to do something like this. The question was whether Tom could prove it. He rode to Prescott that afternoon and went straight to Marshal Harrison's office. Wade listened to the story, examined the oil-soaked rag, and shook his head. Even if it was Cyrus, and I'm not saying it was, you've got no proof. Could have been any of a dozen people. Hell, could have been Apache for all we know, trying to make it look like settlers did it. You know it wasn't Apache, Tom said. They wouldn't burn my ranch. Not after what happened. What I know and what I can prove are 2 different things. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Tom, you need to understand something. You've become a symbol. People on both sides are using you to make points about loyalty, about who belongs here and who doesn't, until this conflict with the Apache is resolved. You're going to be caught in the crossfire, so I should just accept that someone tried to kill me and my men. I'm saying be careful. Watch your property. Keep your rifle close. And maybe, for your own sake, consider leaving the territory until things cool down. Tom left the marshal's office feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. He'd tried to do the right thing, and it had cost him his reputation, his business relationships, and now nearly his life. Part of him wondered if everyone else was right, if he'd been naive to think one act of kindness could bridge centuries of hatred and violence. He was walking back to his wagon when he heard a familiar voice. "Mr. Whitfield?" Tom turned to find a young woman approaching. Couldn't have been more than 25. With sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a notebook in her hand. "I'm Sarah Montgomery, with the Territorial Observer," she said. "I'd like to interview you about your relationship with Chief Nantan. I've got nothing to say to newspapers," Tom replied, starting to walk away. "I'm not like the others," Sarah said quickly. "I don't think you're a traitor or a fool. I think you're someone who did something decent in a world that's forgotten what decent looks like. I want to tell your side of the story." Tom stopped. "Why?" "Because truth matters. Because right now you're being painted as either a villain or a victim, and I don't think you're either one. I think you're just a man who made a choice based on his principles, and people need to hear about that. Especially now." Tom studied her. There was sincerity in her eyes, a hunger for truth that reminded him of why he'd helped Kaya and Mala in the first place. Because it was right, regardless of consequences. "All right," he said. "But I'm not changing my story to make anyone comfortable. I wouldn't want you to." They sat in a small cafe, and for the next hour, Tom told Sarah everything. He told her about finding the sisters, about giving them the wagon, about Nantan's arrival with 200 warriors. He told her about the gifts exchanged, the promises made, and the friendship that developed. He told her about the hostility from his neighbors, the pressure from the army, and the fire that nearly destroyed his ranch. Sarah took notes frantically, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Tom finished, she sat back and studied her notes. "This is remarkable," she said. "Do you realize what you've done? You've created the only documented case of peaceful cooperation between settlers and Apache in this entire territory. That's historic. It's also made me a pariah," Tom pointed out. "For now, maybe. But history remembers the people who took stands, Mr. Whitfield, not the ones who went along with the crowd." Sarah closed her notebook. "I'm going to write this story, and I'm going to make sure it gets published not just here, but in papers across the territory. People need to know that another way is possible. And if it makes things worse for me, then at least the truth will be out there," Sarah said. "Isn't that worth something?" Tom thought about it. He'd already lost so much. His reputation, his business relationships, his sense of safety. What was one more risk? "Yes," he said finally. "It's worth something." Sarah's article ran 2 weeks later, and it was everything she'd promised. She painted Tom not as a traitor, but as a bridge builder, someone who'd chosen humanity over tribalism. She included quotes from Tom about Nantan's honor, about the gifts exchanged, about the possibility of coexistence. She even tracked down Kaya and got a quote from her. "Tom Whitfield saved my sister's life and asked for nothing in return. That is true courage." The reaction was immediate and divided. Some people read the article and saw Tom in a new light. Letters arrived at his ranch from strangers across the territory, thanking him for showing that peace was possible. A church group in Tucson sent supplies and a letter of support. A teacher in Phoenix wrote, asking if she could share his story with her students. But others reacted with fury. The newspaper office in Prescott received threatening letters. Sarah herself was called an Apache sympathizer and worse. And for Tom, the hostility from his immediate neighbors only intensified. 3 days after the article published, Tom found a note nailed to his front door. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. "Leave the territory or we'll make you leave." That night, Tom called Dutch, Pete, and Jacob together. They sat around the kitchen table, the oil lamp casting long shadows on the walls. "I want you all to know," Tom said, "that if you want to leave, I understand. This has become dangerous, and I won't hold it against any of you if you decide working here isn't worth the risk. The three men exchanged glances. Finally, Dutch spoke. "Boss, I've been with you 8 years. Seen you through good times and bad. I didn't sign on because it was safe. I signed on because you're a decent man who treats people fair." "That hasn't changed. I'm staying too," Pete said. "My pa always told me to stand by people who stand by their principles." "You've done that." "Least I can do is the same," Jacob nodded. "I ain't got nowhere else to be, Mr. Whitfield. And besides, this is the most interesting job I've ever had." Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, all of you." But even as he spoke, he wondered how long their loyalty would last. How long before someone got hurt? How long before the threats turned into action? He didn't have to wonder for long. 2 nights later, riders came to the ranch. Tom woke to the sound of gunshots and men shouting. He grabbed his rifle and rushed to the window. In the moonlight, he could see at least a dozen masked riders circling the property, firing into the air, clearly trying to terrorize rather than kill, for now. Tom fired a warning shot through the window, and the riders scattered, disappearing into the darkness. But the message was clear. Next time, they might not just be shooting into the air. As Tom stood in his darkened house, rifle in hand, listening to the fading sound of hoofbeats, he realized he'd reached a crossroads. He could stay and continue fighting for his principles, risking not just his own life but the lives of Dutch, Pete and Jacob, or he could leave, abandon everything he'd built, and let hatred win. It was the hardest decision he'd ever faced. And as the first light of dawn broke over the desert, Tom still didn't know what choice he would make. Tom didn't sleep after the night riders left. He sat on his porch until sunrise, rifle across his lap, watching the horizon for any sign of their return. Dutch joined him around 5 in the morning. 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You look like hell," Dutch said, handing Tom a cup. "Feel worse." Tom took a long drink, the hot coffee burning away some of the exhaustion. "We can't keep living like this, always looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next attack. So what do we do?" Tom had been asking himself the same question all night. Every option seemed to lead to loss. If he stayed, someone would eventually get killed. Maybe him, maybe one of his men, maybe even innocent people caught in the crossfire. If he left, he'd be abandoning not just his ranch, but everything he believed in. Before he could answer, Pete came running from the eastern ridge, his face pale. "Boss, you need to see this." They followed Pete to the ridge overlooking the valley. What Tom saw made his blood run cold. Smoke rising from 3 different locations, the Henderson place to the north, the Dawson Ranch to the east, and what looked like the old mission settlement to the south. "All burning, Apache?" Dutch asked. Pete shook his head. "Don't think so. Henderson's boy rode past an hour ago, said masked men set the fire and rode off before anyone could stop them. Same white men who hit our place, he reckoned." Tom's stomach turned. "They're trying to make it look like an Apache uprising. Get people scared and angry enough to drive Nantan's people out, or worse, or to drive you out," Dutch added grimly. "Nothing unites people like a common enemy. They burn a few ranches, blame the Apache, and suddenly you're the fool who befriended savages right before they turned violent." The pieces fell into place in Tom's mind. This wasn't just about punishing him anymore. Someone was orchestrating a larger campaign, using fear and violence to achieve political ends. And Tom had become a central player in their game, whether he wanted to be or not. "We need to warn Nantan," Tom said suddenly. "What?" Dutch stared at him. "Tom, we just got attacked ourselves. You want to ride into Apache territory now. If people are setting fires and blaming the Apache, Nantan's people are in danger. The army will use this as justification for a campaign. They'll hunt down every Apache in the territory, peaceful or not." Tom stood up. "I have to warn him. That's suicide," Pete protested. "Even if you make it through settler territory without getting shot, you don't know where Nantan's camp is. You could wander the White Mountains for weeks and never find them. Then I'll wander for weeks," Tom said. "But I have to try." Dutch grabbed his arm. "Tom, listen to yourself. You're talking about abandoning the ranch, the thing you've spent 10 years building, to warn people who might not even believe you. Hell, they might kill you on sight for being white. Kaya will vouch for me," Tom said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Tensions had been rising on both sides. Even Nantan's protection might not extend to a white rancher showing up at their camp uninvited, and if she doesn't, Dutch pressed, if you ride all that way just to get yourself killed, what happens to us? What happens to this ranch? Tom looked at his foreman, this man who'd stood by him through everything, who deserved better than to be dragged down by Tom's principles. If I don't come back in 2 weeks, the ranch is yours, Tom said. All of it. Sell it, keep it, do whatever you think is best. But I have to do this, Dutch. I can't live with myself if I don't at least try. Dutch's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he sighed in resignation. When do we leave? We? Tom blinked in surprise. You think I'm letting you ride into Apache territory alone? You'd be dead before you cleared the first ridge. Dutch turned to Pete and Jacob. You two hold down the ranch. Anyone comes asking questions, Tom went to Tucson on business. You don't know when he'll be back. You don't have to do this, Tom said, grateful but reluctant to put Dutch in danger. Yeah, I do. Someone's got to keep you alive long enough to regret this damn fool decision. Dutch managed a small smile. Besides, after 8 years of watching you make terrible choices, I'm kind of invested in seeing how this one turns out. They left within the hour, taking only what they could carry, food, water, ammunition, and blankets. Tom strapped Nantan's knife to his belt, hoping it might serve as a token of goodwill if they encountered Apache scouts. The ride north was tense. They avoided established trails, knowing that both army patrols and hostile settlers might be watching the main routes. The landscape grew rougher as they climbed into the foothills of the White Mountains, rocky terrain covered with juniper and pine, perfect country for ambushes. On the second day, they found the first sign, a broken arrow shaft stuck in a tree, the fletching still bright red and yellow. It was a marker, though whether it was meant to guide travelers or warn them away, Tom couldn't tell. We're being watched, Dutch said quietly. His hand resting on his rifle. Tom felt it too, that prickle on the back of his neck that said unseen eyes were tracking their every move. He raised his hands slowly, showing he was unarmed. My name is Tom Whitfield, he called out to the forest. Friend of Kaya and Mala, daughters of Chief Nantan. I need to speak with the chief. It's urgent. Silence. Only the wind through the pines and the nervous stamping of their horses. Then, from the shadows, warriors emerged. 6 of them, armed with rifles and bows, their faces painted for war. Tom recognized none of them, which wasn't reassuring. The leader was young, maybe 25, with a jagged scar running down his left cheek. Tom Whitfield, the warrior said, his English heavily accented. The white rancher. We know you. I need to see Chief Nantan, Tom said, keeping his voice steady. There's trouble coming. He needs to know. The scarred warrior studied him for a long moment, then looked at Dutch. Why do you bring another white man to our territory? He's my friend. He came to keep me safe. The warrior laughed without humor. Safe? You are not safe here, Tom Whitfield. Many of our warriors remember white promises, white betrayals. Your friendship with our chief does not extend to all our people. I understand that, Tom said. But what I have to tell Nantan affects everyone. Please, I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important. The warriors conferred in Apache, their voices low and urgent. Tom caught Kaya's name mentioned several times, and once what sounded like an argument. Finally, the scarred warrior turned back to them. You will come with us, but your weapons stay here. And if you try anything, you will die before you can blink. Tom and Dutch dismounted and handed over their rifles. The warriors bound their hands, not tightly enough to cut off circulation, but secure enough to prevent any sudden movements. Then they were led deeper into the mountains, their horses trailing behind. The journey took 3 hours, winding through narrow canyons and over treacherous slopes. Tom tried to memorize the route but quickly gave up. The Apache had chosen this location specifically because it was impossible to find without a guide. Finally, they emerged into a hidden valley. Tom's breath caught at the sight. Dozens of wickiups, traditional Apache dwellings made of brush and hide, were scattered throughout the valley. Women worked over cooking fires, children played in the stream that ran through the center, and warriors stood guard at strategic points along the valley's rim. This wasn't just a war camp. This was a community, a people trying to maintain their way of life in the face of impossible odds. The scarred warrior led them to the largest wickiup at the valley's center. Chief Nantan emerged before they arrived, his face showing surprise and concern. Tom Whitfield, you are either very brave or very foolish to come here. Nantan gestured for the warriors to untie them. I assume you have good reason. Someone is setting fires and blaming your people, Tom said urgently. 3 ranches burned in the last 2 days. They're trying to provoke a war, Chief. The army will use this as justification to hunt down every Apache in the territory. Nantan's expression darkened. We know of these fires. We also know we did not set them. But you are right. The soldiers will not care about truth. They will see only an excuse to attack. Kaya appeared from inside the wickiup, her eyes widening when she saw Tom. What are you doing here? Do you know how dangerous this is? I had to warn you, Tom said. Chief, whoever is doing this wants a war. They want to eliminate the Apache once and for all, and they're willing to burn their own people's ranches to make it happen. Why? Nantan asked. What do they gain from our destruction? Land, Dutch spoke up for the first time. The reservation they're trying to force you onto is poor land, barely enough to support half your numbers. But this valley, these mountains, there's water here, timber, probably mineral deposits. Once you're gone, people like Cyrus Blackwood can claim it all. Nantan nodded slowly. So we are in the way of progress. As always. You're in the way of greed, Tom corrected. And they're willing to kill anyone who stands between them and profit. Apache, settlers, anyone. An older warrior Tom didn't recognize stepped forward and spoke rapidly in Apache. Nantan listened, then replied in a tone that suggested disagreement. The conversation grew heated, with several other warriors joining in. Kaya translated quietly for Tom and Dutch. Red Hawk says we should attack first. Strike the settlers before they strike us. Show them that we are not weak. And what does your father say? That more violence will only prove the white men right. That we will never win a war against the army. That our only hope is to find a way to peace, even though peace seems impossible. The debate continued for nearly an hour. Tom watched the tension in the camp grow as more warriors gathered to listen. He could see the division among them. Some wanted to fight, to go down defending their land and way of life. Others, led by Nantan, recognized that such a fight was unwinnable. Finally, Nantan raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned over decades of leadership. We will not attack, he said in English, clearly wanting Tom and Dutch to understand. But we will also not surrender. We will move our camp deeper into the mountains, where the soldiers cannot easily find us. And we will wait. If the white men want war, they will have to come to us, Red Hawk protested, but Nantan silenced him with a look. I have led our people for 30 years. I have fought in more battles than you have lived years. And I know this, we cannot defeat the white men with weapons. There are too many of them, and they keep coming. Our only hope is to survive long enough for the world to change, for men like Tom Whitfield to show others that we are not monsters to be destroyed, but people to be respected. And if the world does not change, Red Hawk demanded, then at least we will die with honor, not as murderers of innocent people. Nantan turned to Tom. You took a great risk coming here. You could have stayed safe on your ranch, pretended not to know what was happening. Why did you not? Tom thought about the question. Because you kept your word to me. Because your daughters showed me that Apache are people, not the savages everyone says you are. Because if I didn't warn you, I'd be no better than the men setting those fires. Nantan placed his hand on Tom's shoulder. You are a good man, Tom Whitfield. But I fear goodness is not enough in times like these. Maybe not, Tom agreed. But it's all I have to offer. That night, Tom and Dutch were given shelter in one of the wickiups. As Tom lay on the buffalo hide bedding, staring up at the stars through the smoke hole, he heard Kaya's voice outside. May I come in? Of course. Kaya entered and sat cross-legged near the fire. In the flickering light she looked tired, older than her years. My father is right, you know, she said quietly. You should not have come. If certain warriors had found you instead of the ones who did, you would be dead. I know. But I couldn't let you walk into a trap without warning. Why do you care so much? Kaya asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. We are not your people. Our survival is not your responsibility. Tom sat up, pulling the blanket around his shoulders against the cold. When I helped you and Mala, I didn't think about sides or peoples or politics. I just saw two human beings who needed help. Somewhere along the way, that simple act grew into something bigger, a friendship, an understanding that maybe we're all not so different. I can't just turn that off now because it's become inconvenient or dangerous. Kaya smiled sadly. You really believe that, don't you? That people can look past their differences and see each other as human, don't you? I want to, Kaya said. My whole life, I have been taught that white men are the enemy, that they only want to destroy us. Then you came along and complicated everything. You showed me that some white men are different, that friendship is possible. But Tom, she paused, her eyes glistening, even if you are right, even if some people can bridge this divide, it is not enough. The forces pushing us toward war are too strong. Too many people on both sides have too much hatred, too much fear. So what do? We survive, Kaya said. We hold on to our humanity for as long as we can. And when the storm finally breaks, as it will, we try to remember that there were moments like this. Moments when we saw each other clearly, without the fog of war and hatred. Maybe that is all anyone can do. Tom wanted to argue, wanted to say there had to be another way. But looking into Kaya's eyes, seeing the resignation mixed with determination, he realized she was probably right. The storm was coming and all they could do was try to weather it. Tom, Kaya said, standing to leave, when you go back to your ranch tomorrow, do not return here again. It is too dangerous. Whatever happens, we will face it. You have done enough. More than enough. Kaya, promise me, she insisted. Promise you will not try to save us again. We are not yours to save. Tom knew she was right, but the promise stuck in his throat. Finally, he nodded. I promise. After Kaya left, Dutch spoke from the darkness. You know you're going to break that promise, don't you? Probably, Tom admitted, just making sure we're on the same page. They left at dawn, escorted partway by the same warriors who'd brought them in. As they rode back toward the ranch, Tom looked back once at the mountains, wondering if he'd ever see Nantan, Kaya, or Mala again. He had a terrible feeling that if he did, it would be under circumstances none of them wanted. Tom and Dutch returned to the ranch 3 days after leaving, exhausted and hungry, but alive. Pete and Jacob met them at the gate with grim news. Lieutenant Brennan came by yesterday with 50 soldiers, Pete reported. Asked where you were. We told him Tucson, like you said. Don't think he believed us. Doesn't matter now, Tom said, dismounting. His whole body ached from 3 days of hard riding. What else? Cyrus Blackwood and about 20 ranchers held a meeting in town, Jacob added. They're forming a militia. Say they're going to solve the Apache problem themselves if the army won't do it fast enough. Tom's stomach dropped. When? 3 days from now. They're gathering at the old fort ruins, then heading north into the mountains. Dutch cursed under his breath. That's a slaughter waiting to happen. Those ranchers don't know the terrain, don't know how to fight Apache warriors. They'll get torn apart, unless they find the camp before the Apache know they're coming, Tom said quietly. 20 armed men could do a lot of damage if they catch them by surprise. The 4 men stood in silence, each understanding the terrible reality. Innocent people were about to die on both sides, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. We have to do something, Tom said finally. Like what? Dutch demanded. We warn the Apache, and the ranchers call us traitors. We warn the ranchers about the ambush potential, and we're helping them massacre Nantan's people. There's no good choice here, Tom. But Tom's mind was already racing. There had to be a way, some path that didn't end in bloodshed. Then an idea began to form, desperate and dangerous, but possibly their only chance. What if we expose who's really behind the fires? Tom said. If we can prove that Cyrus or someone else has been setting them to provoke a war, maybe we can stop this militia before it starts. That's a big if, Pete said. And even bigger, how do we prove it? Tom thought about the oil-soaked rag they'd found, the boot prints, the coordinated timing of the attacks. Someone had organized this campaign, and organizations left traces. Sarah Montgomery, Tom said suddenly. The journalist. She has resources we don't. Access to records, ability to ask questions without raising suspicion. If anyone can help us uncover the truth, it's her. That's still not much of a plan, Dutch pointed out. It's better than nothing. And we've got 3 days. Tom headed for the house. Pete, Jacob, I need you two to watch the ranch. Dutch and I are going back to Prescott. They rode hard, reaching town by nightfall. Sarah Montgomery lived in a modest boarding house near the newspaper office. When she answered Tom's knock, her eyes widened in surprise. Mr. Whitfield? What are you doing here at this hour? I need your help, Tom said. Can we come in? Over coffee in her small room, Tom explained everything, the fires, the militia, his suspicions about Cyrus Blackwood and the land grab. Sarah listened intently, taking occasional notes. It makes sense, she said when he finished. Cyrus has been buying up land options all around the White Mountains for the past year. If the Apache were removed, those options would become incredibly valuable. But proving he's behind the fires is another matter entirely. What about the lumber mill incident last year? Dutch asked. Didn't Cyrus get investigated for arson then? Sarah's eyes lit up. You're right. The investigation was dropped for lack of evidence, but the insurance company kept records. If we can show a pattern, she stood up, energized. There's someone I need to talk to. An insurance investigator named Thomas Gaines. He worked the lumber mill case and always believed Cyrus was guilty. Will he talk to you? He will if I tell him we might finally have enough to prove it. Sarah grabbed her coat. But we need to move fast. If that militia rides out in 3 days and finds the Apache camp, evidence won't matter anymore. The next 36 hours were a blur of investigation. Sarah tracked down Thomas Gaines, who still had his notes from the lumber mill investigation. Together, they found a pattern. Every fire that Cyrus benefited from had been set using the same method. Oil-soaked rags placed near dry kindling, always at times when no one was around to see. But they needed more. They needed direct evidence, something that would stand up to scrutiny. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Sarah's contacts at the general store mentioned that Cyrus had purchased an unusual amount of lamp oil over the past 3 months, far more than any ranch would normally need. That's not proof he used it for arson, Dutch said. No, but it's suspicious, Sarah countered, especially combined with the timing. Every purchase came within a week of a fire. Tom stared at the ledger Sarah had obtained showing Cyrus's purchases. Then he noticed something else. Look at this. 3 days before the fire at our ranch, Cyrus bought oil. But 2 days before that, someone else made a purchase too. Someone whose handwriting looks familiar. Sarah leaned in. That's Frank Dalton's signature. From the trading post, the pieces clicked into place. Cyrus wasn't working alone. He had at least one accomplice, maybe more. A conspiracy this organized had to involve multiple people, all with something to gain from driving the Apache out and claiming their land. We need to take this to Marshal Harrison, Tom said. But when they arrived at the marshal's office early the next morning, they found it empty. A note on the door explained why. Called to Fort Verde back in 3 days. 3 days, Dutch said bitterly. The militia rides out today. Tom felt panic rising in his chest. They'd found evidence, built a case, but there was no one with authority to act on it. The militia would ride north, find Nantan's camp, and start a massacre based on lies. Then we go to the militia ourselves, Tom said. Show them what we found. Make them see they're being manipulated. You think Cyrus is going to let you waltz into that meeting and accuse him of arson? Dutch shook his head. He'll have you shot before you finish your first sentence. Then what do you suggest? Tom demanded, frustration boiling over. We just let this happen. Sarah had been quiet, thinking. Now she spoke up. What if we don't go to the militia? What if we go to the army? Lieutenant Brennan won't listen, Tom said. He wants the Apache removed as much as anyone. Maybe, but he's also a soldier, bound by military law and protocol. If we can show him evidence that civilians are committing crimes to provoke a war, he'll have to investigate. The army won't want civilians starting conflicts they'll have to finish. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. They rode for Fort Verde, pushing their horses to the limit. The fort was 50 miles south, and they had maybe 12 hours before the militia gathered at the ruins and headed north. They arrived at Fort Verde just after noon, horses lathered and exhausted. Lieutenant Brennan was in the officers' quarters, reviewing maps with his sergeants. When Tom and Dutch burst in, followed by Sarah, Brennan's face darkened. "Mr. Whitfield, I should have you arrested for obstruction. I've been trying to question you for weeks. Listen to me first, then arrest me if you want," Tom said, spreading the evidence on Brennan's desk. "The fires weren't set by Apache. They were set by ranchers trying to provoke a war so they can claim Apache land." Brennan's expression remained skeptical, but he looked at the documents. Sarah walked him through the evidence. The purchase records, the pattern of fires, the insurance investigation notes from the lumber mill incident. "This is circumstantial at best," Brennan said when she finished. "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But it's enough to warrant an investigation, isn't it? And in the meantime, there's a civilian militia preparing to attack Nantan's camp. If they do, and it turns out they were manipulated into it by criminals, the army will have to answer for why they didn't prevent it." That got Brennan's attention. Tom could see the calculation in his eyes, the political ramifications of a civilian massacre, especially if it was later revealed to be based on manufactured evidence. "What exactly are you proposing?" Brennan asked. "Stop the militia," Tom said. "Give us time to prove our case. If we're wrong, you can arrest us for interfering with civilian justice. But if we're right, you'll have prevented a massacre and exposed a criminal conspiracy." Brennan studied the maps on his desk, then looked at his sergeants. Finally, he made a decision. "Sergeant Cooper, assemble a detachment. 20 men, ready to ride in 10 minutes. He turned to Tom. "Where is this militia gathering?" "The old fort ruins, 15 miles north of Prescott." "Then that's where we're going. But understand this, Mr. Whitfield. If you're wrong about this, if those fires were set by Apache, I will personally ensure you hang for treason." "Fair enough," Tom said. They rode out within the hour, the cavalry moving at a steady pace that ate up miles. Tom, Dutch, and Sarah rode with them, racing the setting sun and the ticking clock. They reached the ruins at dusk. The militia was already gathered, 23 men, all armed, with Cyrus Blackwood addressing them from horseback. Tom recognized faces in the crowd: Edgar Miller from the general store, Frank Dalton from the trading post, ranchers and townspeople he'd known for years. "And we will show these savages that we will not be terrorized," Cyrus was saying. "We will drive them from our territory once and for all. This is Lieutenant Marcus Brennan, United States Army." Brennan's voice cut through the gathering dusk. "This assembly is disbanded by military authority. Return to your homes immediately." Cyrus wheeled his horse to face the cavalry. "You have no authority over civilians, Lieutenant. We're well within our rights to defend our property, not when that defense is based on fraudulent evidence," Brennan replied. He gestured to Sarah. "Miss Montgomery has documentation suggesting the recent fires were not set by Apache, but by members of this very group." A murmur ran through the militia. Several men exchanged nervous glances. "That's a lie," Cyrus thundered. "Propaganda from an Apache sympathizer." He pointed at Tom. "Whitfield has been working with the savages for months. Of course he'd try to protect them." "Then you won't mind answering some questions about your recent purchases of lamp oil," Sarah called out, holding up the ledger. "Or explaining why every fire coincidentally benefited your land acquisition plans." More murmuring from the militia. Tom could see doubt spreading through the crowd. Frank Dalton suddenly spurred his horse, trying to flee. But cavalry troopers blocked his path, and within moments he was surrounded. "Frank!" Cyrus shouted. "Don't say anything!" But fear had broken Frank's resolve. "I'm not hanging for this," he yelled. "It was Cyrus's idea. All of it. He paid me to help set the fires, said we'd all get rich once the Apache were gone." The confession shattered whatever unity the militia had possessed. Men began backing away from Cyrus, their faces showing shock and betrayal. They'd been prepared to kill for what they thought was self-defense, only to discover they'd been manipulated into becoming murderers for profit. Cyrus reached for his gun, but 3 rifles immediately pointed at him. "Don't be a fool," Brennan said coldly. "It's over, Blackwood. You're under arrest for arson, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Your land options are forfeit, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison if you're lucky. More likely you'll hang." As soldiers moved in to restrain Cyrus and Frank, the rest of the militia dispersed quietly. Men who'd come seeking justice now, slinking away in shame. Tom felt exhaustion wash over him, mixed with profound relief. They'd stopped the massacre. They'd exposed the truth. But he knew the larger conflict was far from over. Brennan approached him. "You were right, Whitfield. I'll admit that. But this doesn't change the fundamental situation. The Apache still need to relocate to the reservation. That's federal policy, and one prevented massacre doesn't alter it." "I know," Tom said tiredly. "But maybe it buys us some time. Time for people to cool down, to see that not every Apache is an enemy." "Maybe that's enough?" "Maybe," Brennan said, though he sounded doubtful. "In any case, you're free to go. And for what it's worth, you showed courage today. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless." Tom, Dutch, and Sarah rode back toward Prescott as night fell. They were silent for a long time, each processing what had happened. Finally, Sarah spoke. "You know this story is going to be in every newspaper in the territory, right? Rancher exposes land grab conspiracy. You're going to be famous, Mr. Whitfield." "I don't want to be famous," Tom said. "I just want to live on my ranch in peace." "Well, you might get your wish now," Dutch said. "With Cyrus exposed, people will have to reconsider their opinions of you. Might even get some apologies." But Tom wasn't thinking about apologies or redemption in the eyes of his neighbors. He was thinking about Nantan, Kaya, and Mala, wondering if they'd heard about the militia, if they knew how close they'd come to disaster. 2 weeks later, a rider came to the ranch. It was one of Nantan's warriors, not the scarred one from before, but an older man with kind eyes. "Chief Nantan sends his thanks," the warrior said. "Word reached us of what you did. You saved many lives, both Apache and white. Is the chief well?" Tom asked. "He is. But he asks that you do not try to contact us again. The army is searching the mountains now, looking for our camp. It is too dangerous for you to be associated with us further." Tom nodded, understanding. Tell him I'll remember what he taught me." "About honor and keeping promises," the warrior smiled. "He knows. That is why he trusts you to stay away." He reached into a pouch and pulled out something wrapped in soft deerskin. "Kaya asked me to give you this." Tom unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small beaded bracelet, the kind Apache women made for people they valued. Attached to it was a note in English, written in Kaya's careful hand. "You showed me that bridges can be built between peoples, even when the world wants to tear them down. I will never forget. Walk in beauty, Tom Whitfield." But Tom felt his throat tighten. "Tell her thank you." "Tell her I'll never forget either." The warrior rode away, disappearing into the desert like a ghost. Tom stood watching until he could no longer see even the dust trail. Life slowly returned to normal on the Whitfield ranch. With Cyrus exposed and imprisoned, the hostility from neighbors gradually eased. Some even apologized, admitting they'd been caught up in fear and manipulation. Edgar Miller started greeting Tom in town again. The bank extended his line of credit. Orders stopped being mysteriously delayed. Sarah's article about the conspiracy was picked up by newspapers across the West, making Tom briefly famous. He received letters from strangers, some praising his courage, others condemning him for protecting savages. He ignored both types, focusing instead on the work of rebuilding his ranch and his life, but he never forgot. Every night, before sleep, he would hold the beaded bracelet Kaya had sent and think about the 2 sisters he'd helped, the chief who'd honored him with friendship, and the impossible dream of a world where people saw each other as human first and foremost. 6 months later, news came that Chief Nantan and his band had surrendered to the army and agreed to relocate to the San Carlos reservation. Tom rode 3 days to witness their departure, standing among the crowd as the Apache were loaded onto wagons for the journey. He saw Nantan briefly, the old chief's face weathered and sad, but still proud. Their eyes met across the distance, and Nantan nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect, of goodbye. Tom never saw Kaya or Mala that day. Perhaps they were already on the wagons, or perhaps they'd chosen not to be present for this final humiliation. Either way, Tom understood. Some goodbyes were too painful to bear. As the wagons rolled away, carrying the last free Apache from the White Mountains, Tom felt tears running down his face. He wept, not just for Nantan's people, but for what could have been, a world where different peoples learned to coexist, where kindness mattered more than conquest, where a simple act of helping two strangers could change hearts instead of just delaying the inevitable. Years later, when Tom was an old man telling stories to his grandchildren, they would ask him if he regretted what he'd done, giving away his last wagon, risking everything for people who weren't his own. Standing against the tide of history, he would hold up the beaded bracelet, worn now with age but still vibrant, and say, "Not for a single moment. I may not have changed the world, but I changed my corner of it. I proved that honor exists in all peoples, that friendship can bridge any divide, and that doing the right thing matters even when it costs you everything." That's a legacy worth having. And somewhere, on a reservation hundreds of miles away, an old Apache woman named Kaya would tell her own grandchildren about a white rancher who saw her not as an enemy, but as a human being. A man who proved that kindness, courage, and honor could exist anywhere, in anyone, if you had the eyes to see it and the heart to honor it. Two stories, told in different languages, in different places, by different peoples, but at their core, both stories said the same thing, that in a world torn by hatred and fear, a single act of compassion can echo through generations, and that is the legacy of Tom Whitfield, the rancher who gave his last wagon to two Apache sisters and discovered that sometimes the smallest gestures of humanity can mean more than all the grand speeches and mighty deeds in the world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.